Outpost Varan 7 was not a beautiful place. It floated at the far edge of Galactic Council space like something that had been set down and never picked back up. The walls were gray. The corridors were narrow. The recycled air smelled faintly of metal and something that was almost but not quite like food. Most of the staff who worked there had been assigned rather than chosen, which meant that most of them were either very junior, very unlucky, or both. Finn Caro was both. He was 26 years old, with an unremarkable face, brown hair that never quite sat flat, and the kind of quiet that people often mistook for shyness. He was not shy. He simply did not feel the need to fill every silence with noise. His supervisor back on Earth had written in his transfer recommendation that Finn was patient, observant, and unlikely to cause diplomatic incidents, which was the nicest way anyone had ever described someone being sent somewhere unimportant. Finn had read the file on Outpost Varan 7 before he arrived. He knew it housed researchers and delegates from 11 different species. He knew humans were the newest members of the Galactic Council, admitted only 4 years ago after a vote that had passed by a margin thin enough to be embarrassing. He knew that most older species considered humanity the way a long-established group considers a new arrival, with a mixture of tolerance and the quiet assumption that they would need to prove themselves before anyone took them seriously. What the file had not fully prepared him for was how that feeling sat in the air of the outpost like weather. It was not cruel. Nobody was rude to Finn's face. But there was a particular way the Yvari delegates would pause their conversations when he walked past, as if waiting for him to be gone before continuing. There was a particular way the Salvari researchers would look through him at meal times, their eyes moving on to more interesting things. 11 species had centuries of shared history in this galaxy. Humans had 4 years and a thin vote. Finn ate his meals and did his work and kept his thoughts to himself. He noticed things though. He had always been good at noticing things. The thing he noticed most in those first 2 weeks was the dragon. Vreth was impossible not to notice if you were paying attention, and yet somehow most people managed it. He was Drakari, one of the oldest species the Council had on record, which was a strange thing to say about a species that no longer really existed in any meaningful number. He was enormous. In the common area, which was already the largest room on the outpost, he made the space feel small. His scales were the deep dark color of a sky with no stars in it, though some of them, particularly along his left side and across his jaw, had gone pale and rough with old scars. His eyes were amber, large and still, the kind of eyes that had seen a very long time pass. He sat every meal period in the same place. Far end of the common area, nearest the wide viewport that looked out into open space. Always alone. Always at the edge of things. The other species gave him a wide space without appearing to think about it, the way water moves around a stone. The Yvari had once filed a formal complaint because Vreth had looked at their table for too long. The complaint had been reviewed, noted, and filed without action, because Vreth had not actually done anything except exist in a direction the Yvari didn't like. Finn watched all of this with interest. He read what the outpost database had on the Drakari, which was less than he expected for a species so old. There were references to their worlds, their age, their reputation. There was a brief administrative note about a territorial resolution several centuries back. Finn made a note to look into that further and moved on. What interested him more immediately was simpler than history. The dragon ate alone every single day. He sat by the viewport and looked at the stars and did not speak to anyone, and no one spoke to him. Sometimes crew members would walk the long way around the common area to avoid passing near his table. Once, Finn watched a junior Salvari researcher change direction 3 times in the space of a single minute to avoid making eye contact with Vreth. Vreth did not appear to react to any of this. He simply sat. He ate. He looked at the stars. But Finn had a talent for reading stillness, and something in the quality of Vreth's stillness did not look like peace to him. It looked like a thing that had been alone for a very long time and had stopped expecting anything different. Finn thought about that for 2 weeks. Then on a Thursday evening, when the common area was quiet and half empty and the recycled air smelled slightly more like metal than usual, he picked up his dinner tray and walked to the far end of the room. He set his tray down across from Vreth and sat. The silence that followed was the kind that had weight. Vreth's amber eyes moved to him slowly, the way large things move when they are not startled because very little startles them anymore. He looked at Finn the way one might look at something unexpected but not yet identified, carefully, without expression. Finn met his eyes and did not look away. He was, if he was honest with himself, a little afraid. Vreth was very large and very old, and the scars on his jaw told stories Finn did not know yet. But being a little afraid had never seemed to Finn like a good enough reason not to do something that was clearly the right thing to do. He picked up his fork. I noticed you always sit alone, Finn said. His voice was easy and normal, the same voice he used for everything. Thought that might get old after a while. Vreth did not answer immediately. A long silence stretched out between them. It was the kind of silence that most people could not have sat with, and in fact most people would have already picked up their tray and made an excuse and left. Finn ate a piece of protein ration and looked out at the stars through the viewport. He waited. Vreth's voice, when it came, was low and deep and sounded like something that had not been used in a long time. Like a door in an old house, opened slowly. You are not afraid of me, Vreth said. It was not quite a question. It was the observation of someone who was used to being feared and was noting that something different was happening. A little, Finn said honestly. But that didn't seem like a good enough reason not to come over. Another silence. Shorter this time. Finn kept eating. He did not fill the quiet with nervous talk. He did not try to prove anything. He simply sat there in the easy way of someone who was exactly where he had decided to be. Outside the viewport the stars were very still. Then Vreth spoke again. It was a single word, or perhaps something between a word and a sound, low and shaped carefully, older than any language Finn had studied. It moved differently in the air than regular speech did, as if it carried more weight than its size suggested. Finn would later learn enough about Drakri culture to understand exactly what had just happened. In that moment he only knew that it felt significant, the way some moments do before you understand why. He looked up at Vreth. Is that your name? He asked. Vreth looked back at him steadily. It is the name I was given, he said. Not the one in the council file. Finn nodded slowly. He turned the sound of it over in his mind and held it there carefully, the way you hold something you don't want to drop. That's a strong name, he said. I'll remember it. Vreth was quiet after that. He turned back to his food and then back to the stars, and the great stillness settled around him again. But something in the quality of it had changed in a way Finn could feel but not yet name. It was the difference between a silence that is empty and a silence that simply has nothing left it needs to say for now. Finn finished his dinner. When he stood to go he picked up his tray and gave Vreth a small nod, the kind between people who have reached an understanding without needing to announce it. He walked back across the common area. Behind him, at the table by the viewport, the last Drakri dragon watched him go. And for the first time in longer than most civilizations had existed, he did not turn immediately back to the stars. Finn came back the next evening. He did not make a big thing of it. He simply picked up his tray at the meal counter, walked to the far end of the common area, and sat down across from Vreth the same way he had the night before. As if it were already a habit. As if it had always been this way. Vreth looked at him when he sat down. Said nothing. But he did not move away either, which Finn took as a reasonable sign that he was not unwelcome. They ate in silence for a while. Outside the viewport the stars were the same as they always were, patient and very far away. The common area behind them was its usual mixture of low conversations and the sounds of different species eating in different ways. Nobody came to this end of the room. Nobody looked over. It was as if the two of them existed in a quieter version of the same space. Finn talked first, the same as before. He talked about small things. He described the city he had grown up in, the way rain sounded on the roof of his childhood home on autumn nights, the particular smell of wet pavement, the noise a crowd makes when a football goes into the net and every person in the stands becomes one loud happy thing for just a second. He was not trying to impress Vreth with these stories. He was simply sharing them the way you share things with someone you are getting to know. Vreth listened. He was very good at listening. He had the stillness of something ancient, and within that stillness there was a quality of attention that made you feel, when he turned it toward you, that what you were saying was being kept somewhere carefully. On the third evening Vreth spoke about himself for the first time. He did not start with the big things. He started small, the way people always do when they are not yet sure how much they trust the space they are speaking into. He described the worlds his clan had come from, 3 of them, in a system that had no name in any current galactic map because the Council had reclassified it after the territorial resolution and given it a number instead of a name. He described the color of the sky on the middle world, which was a deep green at midday and shifted to something close to gold near the horizon at night. He described the sound of the wind through the rock formations in the northern regions, which his people had believed was the voice of something older than themselves, though he said this last part in a way that suggested he was not entirely sure whether he still believed it. Finn listened the same way Vreth listened. Carefully. Without interrupting. Over the following days the stories grew longer and the silences between them grew more comfortable, the way silences do when two people have stopped needing to fill them. Vreth talked about the Drakri the way someone talks about a home they are no longer able to return to, with love that had nowhere left to go except into words. He talked about their laws, which were old and specific and took a lifetime to properly understand. He talked about their music, which was not made with instruments but with the resonance of Dracari voices in enclosed stone spaces, and which he described as something that moved through your body rather than simply entering through your ears. He talked about his clan. Not all at once. In pieces over several evenings, the way a thing that is very large can only be moved a little at a time. Finn listened to all of it and said very little, because he understood that what Vreth needed in these moments was not response but witness. He needed someone to hear the things he was saying and hold them as real. 400 years is a long time for a memory to exist only inside one mind with no one else to confirm that it happened. Then one evening Vreth said something that made Finn go very still. He said the name of his clan's home system, the real name, the Dracari name, and then he said that the Galactic Council had a different name for what had happened there. He said the word in the same flat tone one uses for something that has been wrong for so long that the wrongness has become familiar. Territorial resolution. Finn recognized the phrase. He had seen it in the database during his first week, had noted it as something to look into, and had not yet gotten around to it. That evening, after he left the common area, he went directly to the archive room. He sat down at the terminal and pulled up the file. It was not a long document. That was the first thing that struck him. The destruction of an entire people. Their worlds, their culture, their history, every living member of a species that had existed for longer than most council members had been spacefaring, and the document describing it was shorter than the maintenance report Finn had filed last week about a faulty air filter. The language was clean and administrative. Words like reclassification and boundary adjustment and resource reallocation sat in neat sentences that described enormous things in the smallest possible way. There was no record of what had been lost. No record of who had lived there. No record of names. There was a council vote count at the bottom. The resolution had passed. The date was 412 years ago. Finn sat in the archive room for a long time. He was not a person who got loud when he was angry. His anger was a quiet thing, which made it in some ways more serious than the loud kind. It settled into him like something solid and heavy and it did not move. He went back to the common area. Vreth was still at the viewport. He often stayed late, long after the other staff had gone to their quarters. Finn sat down across from him and was quiet for a moment, the way he always was when he was organizing his thoughts. Then he said, "I read the council's file tonight. The territorial resolution." Vreth went very still. "It's wrong," Finn said. His voice was steady and plain. The way they wrote it, the words they used, what they did and what they called it afterward. It's wrong. And I'm angry about it. He was not performing the anger. He was not saying it to make Vreth feel better or to seem like a good person. He said it because it was simply true and because it seemed important that someone say it plainly, without qualification, without the careful diplomatic language that the council used to make terrible things sound like paperwork. The silence that followed was different from the other silences. It had something in it. Something that was waiting. When Vreth spoke his voice was very quiet. "You are the first being in 400 years, he said slowly, to be angry for me. Not with him. Not near him. For him." Finn held that sentence and understood the full weight of it. 400 years. Every species in the galaxy had read that file or could have. Every diplomat and researcher and delegate who had ever shared a room with Vreth had known, or could have known, what the territorial resolution meant. And in 400 years not one of them had come to him and said simply, "That was wrong, and I am angry about it." Finn did not know what to say to that. He did not think there was anything adequate. So he said nothing and simply stayed where he was. After a while Vreth spoke again. He seemed to be choosing his words with particular care, the way someone does when they are about to say something they have never said to anyone before. He told Finn about the birth name. He explained what it meant among his people, not as a greeting, not as a courtesy, not as something exchanged between acquaintances. Among the Dracari a birth name was given once in a lifetime to one person, and the meaning of the giving was specific and absolute. It meant trust of a particular kind. The kind that had no conditions attached to it. It meant, "If I am dying, I want you beside me." Finn was quiet for a long time after Vreth finished speaking. He thought about the evening 2 weeks ago, the unremarkable Thursday, when he had carried his tray to the far end of the common area simply because sitting alone every night seemed like a hard way to live. He thought about the word Vreth had spoken into the quiet air between them, the name that was not in any council file, the name that had moved differently than regular speech. He had said he would remember it. He had not known when he said it what he was actually promising. He knew now. He looked at Vreth steadily and held the knowledge of it, the weight of what that name meant, and the weight of the fact that this ancient, scarred, 400-year-old creature had given it to a quiet young human who had simply decided to sit down one Thursday evening because it seemed like the right thing to do. Outside the viewport, the stars continued their patient work of burning. Neither of them said anything more that night. They did not need to. Vreth had been gone for 6 weeks before anyone noticed something was wrong. That was the first uncomfortable truth. The survey mission had been routine, a solo cataloging job on an uninhabited moon 2 systems away, the kind of quiet work that took patience more than skill, and Vreth had patience in quantities that most living things could not imagine. He had done similar work dozens of times over the decades he had spent at various outposts and research stations, always alone, always reliable, always returning without incident. So when his scheduled check-in did not come through on the 43rd day, the outpost communications officer logged it as a possible signal delay and waited 24 hours before escalating. When the 44th day passed with no contact, she filed a standard missing vessel report and forwarded it to the nearest council relay station. The relay station took 18 hours to respond. Finn was in the middle of a routine lab report when the alert came through on his console. It was not addressed to him specifically, it was a general outpost notification, the kind that got sent to all senior and mid-level staff when something significant came in. Finn was neither senior nor mid-level, but his console was connected to the general feed, and nobody had ever thought to restrict his access because nobody had ever thought about Finn's console access at all. He read the notification 3 times. Vreth's survey vessel had been found adrift by a passing freight crew approximately 2 systems from its intended destination. The freight crew had reported a life sign, singular, weak, stable enough to register but not by a margin that suggested comfort. A council medical observer had been dispatched and was expected to arrive at the vessel within 31 hours. Finn pushed back from his desk and went to find more information. The second notification came through 6 hours later, by which time Finn had already read everything the outpost database held on Dracari physiology, which was not much but was more than nothing. The council medical observer had arrived ahead of schedule and filed a preliminary report. Finn accessed it through the same general feed and read it standing at his console without sitting down. The condition was called hollow flame sickness. It was a degenerative illness specific to Dracari biology, attacking the internal systems that sustained what the medical text called the flame, the biological fire that was central to Dracari life in a way that went beyond the physical. There were 12 documented cases in galactic medical history. All 12 had resulted in death. The time frames varied but the outcomes had been, without exception, the same. The Council's recommendation was at the bottom of the report, written in the clean, careful language that the Council used for everything. Given the terminal prognosis, the absence of applicable treatment protocols, and the patient's status as the sole remaining member of a non-priority species classification, it is recommended that the patient be made comfortable and monitored until natural conclusion. Finn read that last sentence twice. Natural conclusion. He stood very still for a moment. The lab around him continued its ordinary business. Equipment running, air cycling, the distant sound of other staff moving through the corridor outside. Everything normal. Everything continuing as if the words on his screen were perfectly reasonable, which the Council clearly believed they were. Finn did not believe they were. He sat down and began filing an emergency transport request. He had no medical credentials. He had no political standing. He was a junior xenobiologist on an unimportant outpost at the edge of Council space, and his request was going to arrive on the desk of someone who had never heard of him and had no particular reason to do anything about it. He knew all of this and filed the request anyway, because doing nothing was not something his mind would allow him to settle into. The automated response came back in 4 minutes. His request had been received and would be reviewed in order of priority. Current estimated processing time was 72 to 96 hours. Finn looked at the timeline in the medical report. The observer had given Vreth between 3 and 5 days. He leaned back in his chair and pressed his hands flat on the desk and thought. Then his console made a sound he had not heard before. It was not the standard notification tone. It was something else, lower, with a quality to it that was hard to describe, as if the sound itself was made of older material than the equipment producing it. His screen displayed an incoming transmission flag, but the origin coding was unlike anything in the standard Council format. It had come through on a frequency that was not listed in any of the outpost's regular communication channels. The transmission was locked. The lock was not a standard encryption. Finn looked at the key prompt on his screen and did not understand it at first because it was not written in any language his console's translator recognized. It took him nearly a minute studying it before he understood what he was looking at. It was Dracari script. Old form, older than the version that appeared in any of the archive texts he had read. But he recognized the shape of it, the particular way the characters carried weight differently from standard galactic script. His hands were very steady as he typed in the key. Not a password. Not a code. A name. The name that had been spoken quietly at a viewport on an unremarkable Thursday evening, a name that lived in no council file, a name that Finn had carried carefully in his memory since the night it was given to him. The transmission opened. The audio was poor. Distance had worn it thin and the signal had clearly degraded badly over however long it had taken to reach the outpost through whatever indirect route it had traveled. There was a low static underneath it, and the sound of a ship that was not running well, small mechanical complaints, the hum of systems working harder than they should. And then Vretha's voice. It was not the voice Finn was used to. That voice had been low and deep and carried the easy weight of something that had existed for a very long time. This voice was the same voice made smaller, the way a fire is still a fire even when the wood is almost gone. It was careful and slow, each word placed with the deliberate effort of someone for whom speaking had become an expensive thing. There were not many words. Vreth had never used more words than necessary, and whatever strength he had left he was not going to spend on anything but what mattered. Finn. Pause. The static. The sound of the struggling ship. You know my name. Another pause longer. Finn sat completely still. Come. That was all. The transmission ended and the screen returned to its normal state as if nothing unusual had happened. The lab around Finn continued its ordinary business. Equipment running. Air cycling. Everything normal. Finn sat with the silence for approximately 30 seconds. Then he stood up, picked up his access card and walked out of the lab. He went directly to the outpost commander's office, not the communications officer, not the administrative desk, the commander herself, and he knocked on the door and went in when she called and stood in front of her desk and explained the situation in clear and simple language. He told her about the transmission. He told her about the key. He explained what the key was, not a code but a name, a Drakri birth name which according to Drakri culture meant one specific thing and had been given to him and to no one else. He explained that the transmission had been addressed to him by name and that he was the only person on the outpost or possibly anywhere in the current galactic community who could have opened it. He put the medical report on her desk with the words natural conclusion facing up. The commander was a practical woman who had managed a difficult outpost for 11 years and had developed a good sense for when a situation was going to move whether she directed it or not. She looked at the report. She looked at Finn. She looked at the report again. She picked up her console and began making arrangements. Finn went back to his quarters and packed a bag in less than 10 minutes. He took his research tablet, a change of clothes, the small collection of Drakri biological texts he had downloaded to his personal drive over the past few months and nothing else. He did not spend time thinking about whether this was a good idea or whether he was qualified or whether it was likely to make any difference. Vreth had used his name as a key. He had sent a message through channels that no standard system would flag, on a frequency that required a name no council file contained, across a distance that should have made the signal impossible. He had done all of that to reach one specific person. Finn was on a medical transport within 4 hours. He sat in the small passenger section of the ship as it pulled away from Outpost Varan 7 and watched the station shrink through the porthole until it was just another small light among many. Then he opened his research tablet and began reading everything he could find about hollow flame sickness. He had a long way to travel. He intended to use every minute of it. The medical ship smelled of cold metal and something faintly chemical, the way places smell when they are built for function and nothing else. Finn had been traveling for 19 hours by the time it docked alongside Vretha's survey vessel. He had slept for 2 of those hours, briefly and badly, and had spent the rest of the time reading. By the time the docking clamps engaged he had gone through every available document on hollow flame sickness twice, cross-referenced the biological data with general Drakri physiology texts, and made 11 pages of notes on his tablet in the small careful handwriting he used when he was thinking hard about something. 12 cases. 12 deaths. The treatments had been consistent across all 12. Aggressive biological intervention, medications designed to slow the degeneration, physical procedures to support the failing internal systems, and isolation to reduce external stimulation and physical stress on the patient. The logic was sound as medical logic goes. Reduce the strain. Slow the decline. By time. It had not worked. Not once. Not even close. Finn had read the postmortems for all 12 cases during the last 4 hours of the journey. He was not a medical doctor, and some of the biological specifics were beyond his training, but he understood enough to follow the shape of what had happened in each case. The patients had declined steadily. some faster, some slower. But the direction had always been the same. He closed his tablet when the docking light turned green and picked up his bag. The council's medical observer was waiting for him at the connecting corridor. Her name was Dr. Senna Salvari, tall and precise, with the particular expression of someone who has already formed a conclusion and is waiting with limited patience for everyone else to catch up. She held a data pad and looked at Finn the way people look at something that has arrived where it is not expected and is not entirely welcome. "You're the human from Varan 7, she said. "Finn Caro," he said. "Xenobiologist. You have no medical credentials relevant to this case." "No," Finn agreed pleasantly. She looked at him for a moment longer. "He's in the main hold. It's the only space large enough." She paused. "I want to be direct with you, Mr. Caro. I have seen the data. I have reviewed every available record on this condition. I'm not telling you this to be unkind, I am telling you because I think it is better to know. You should prepare yourself for what you are going to see, and you should understand that the most likely outcome has not changed." "I understand," Finn said. "Can I see him now?" She stepped aside. The main hold of the survey vessel was large by the standards of a small ship, which meant it was just barely large enough. Vreth lay along the far wall, his body taking up most of the available floor space. Someone had placed a thermal layer beneath him, a practical kindness, the kind that medical observers are trained to provide. Equipment had been arranged around him in a careful semicircle, monitoring equipment mostly, screens showing the slow patterns of a body working much harder than it should to do the basic work of continuing. Finn stood in the doorway for a moment. He had known, intellectually from the medical report, that Vreth was in serious condition. Knowing a thing and seeing it are different experiences. The Vreth he knew had a presence that filled a room even when he was being still, a weight and depth to him that you felt before you fully registered it. The creature lying in the hold had that same size, but something essential had gone quieter inside it. His scales, usually the deep dark color of a night sky, had faded badly at the edges, gone pale and dull the way embers go when the fire beneath them has shrunk. His breathing was audible from the doorway, slow and heavy and effortful, each breath a considered undertaking. Finn walked across the hold and pulled the equipment crate close to Vretha's side and sat down on it. He put his bag down and took out his tablet. Then he put the tablet away again. He would read later. Right now he simply sat and looked at Vreth and let himself understand fully what he was looking at, not as data, not as a medical problem, but as his friend, who was very unwell and very far from anywhere comfortable, and who had spent the last portion of his strength sending a message to the one person he wanted near him. "I'm here," Finn said quietly. "Took me a bit. Sorry about that." Vreth did not respond. His eyes were closed. The monitoring equipment continued its slow work. Finn stayed. Dr. Senna came in twice during the first day to update the readings and check the equipment. The second time she paused longer than necessary and looked at Finn, who had barely moved from the crate, and said carefully that he was welcome to use the crew quarters to rest. Finn thanked her and did not move. He talked. Not constantly, he was not trying to fill the silence for the sake of it. He talked the way he always had with Vreth, in the comfortable, unhurried way of someone who is simply sharing their thoughts with a person they trust. He talked about the journey here, about the freight crew who had found the vessel and what their report had said, about the particular quality of light through the ship's small porthole that changed as they moved relative to the nearest star. He talked about small memories, a summer afternoon on Earth when he was 12 and had fallen asleep in a garden and woken up with the strange peaceful confusion of not knowing for a moment where or when he was. He talked about the Dracari texts he had been reading, what he had learned from them, the parts that had moved him. He was doing two things at once without making either of them obvious. He was keeping Vreth company. And he was thinking. On the second day he went back through his notes. He went through the postmortems again, slower this time, looking not for what was there but for what was missing. He went through the Dracari biological texts he had downloaded, all of them, including the older ones that had not been formally translated and that his tablet's translation function handled imperfectly, producing sentences that were sometimes grammatically strange but mostly followable. He found a line he had half noticed during the journey, buried in a passage about Dracari physical development that most researchers appeared to have treated as cultural description rather than biological data. He read it 3 times. The internal flame of the Dracari is not a purely physical structure. It is built and sustained through connection, through the bonds between clan members, through the presence of those known and trusted. Prolonged separation from such bonds does not merely affect the spirit. It affects the flame itself. Isolation is not a neutral state for the Dracari. It is a slow diminishment. Finn sat with that for a long time. He thought about 12 cases treated with isolation to reduce external stress. He thought about the logic of it, sound medical logic, applied to a species whose biology the medical community understood only partially, working from a framework that treated the physical and the relational as separate systems when for the Drakri they were apparently the same system. He thought about Vreth sitting alone at the far end of the common area for however many years, at however many outposts, in whatever quiet rooms he had occupied across 400 years of being the last. He understood something then that the medical reports had not contained. Vreth had not simply contracted an illness. He had been becoming ill for a very long time, in a way that no one had recognized because the mechanism was not one that standard medicine looked for. Finn closed his tablet. He moved his crate closer to Vreth's side, close enough that if Vreth had been conscious he would have been able to hear Finn's voice clearly without effort. And he began to talk again, more deliberately this time with more warmth in it, letting the words carry what he understood now about why they mattered. He talked through the second night. On the morning of the third day something changed. It was small. The monitoring equipment registered it before Finn's eyes did. A slight shift in the pattern of one of the readings, a change in the quality of Vreth's breathing. Finn looked up from his tablet where he had been reading aloud from a Drakri historical text, his voice gone slightly rough from hours of use. Vreth's eyes opened. Slowly. With great effort. The amber of them was dim, much dimmer than normal, like a lamp with most of its fuel gone. But they were open. And they moved, gradually, until they found Finn's face. Finn looked back at him steadily. "Good morning," he said. His voice was calm and ordinary, as if this were simply another evening at the viewport with 2 plates of protein rations between them. Vreth looked at him for a long moment. When he spoke it was barely above a whisper, rough and slow. "You came," he said. "You asked," Finn said simply. Dr. Senna's equipment registered the change 4 minutes later. She came into the hold quickly and stopped when she saw Vreth's open eyes. She looked at her data pad. She looked at Vreth. She looked at Finn, sitting on his crate in the same position he had barely left for 3 days, holding his tablet, looking for all the world like someone who had simply been having a quiet conversation. She checked the readings again with the careful attention of someone who wants to be certain before they believe something. Then she went back to her station to update the report, and her footsteps in the corridor were slightly faster than they had been before. The review notification arrived 17 days after Vreth opened his eyes. Finn was sitting in the same hold, on the same crate, reading aloud from a Drakri historical text while Vreth ate a small amount of food, the first real meal he had managed in days, when his tablet made the notification sound. He glanced at it, read the subject line, and set the tablet face down on his knee without changing his expression. Vreth noticed. He noticed most things even now, even diminished. His amber eyes moved to Finn's face with the slow, careful attention of someone who has learned to read small signals. "Something has happened," Vreth said. His voice was still rough and slow, but it was stronger than it had been 3 days ago. Each day added a small amount back, the way a fire rebuilds itself when given the right conditions. "The council has called a review," Finn said, "of my conduct during the medical event. Protocol violations apparently." Vreth was still for a moment. "They are reviewing you." "Yes. For coming here." "For coming here without authorization or medical credentials, yes." The silence that followed had a particular quality to it. Finn had learned to read Vreth's silences the way some people read weather. Each one had a different texture, a different temperature. This one was not sad or resigned. It was something older and colder than that, and it reminded Finn that the creature recovering slowly in front of him had been alive for centuries and had watched institutions do what institutions do for a very long time. "When is the hearing?" Vreth asked. 12 days, Finn said. "It's remote. I attend by communication link." He paused. "You don't need to worry about it." Vreth looked at him steadily and said nothing, which was a very specific kind of answer. The hearing was conducted by the Council's Regional Medical Review Board, which consisted of 5 members from 4 different species, chaired by a senior delegate that Finn's communication system identified as Magistrate Aldrin. He was old, as galactic officials go, careful and methodical, with the manner of someone who had built a career on procedure and considered procedure to be among the higher virtues. Finn attended the hearing from a chair beside Vreth, because Vreth had indicated, without making it a request, that this was where he expected Finn to be. Finn had set up his communication link accordingly. The panel, when they connected, could see him clearly, a young human in a survey vessel hold, sitting next to an ancient recovering dragon, which Finn suspected made a certain impression before anyone had said a word. Magistrate Aldrin opened the review in formal language that took some time to get through. Finn listened to all of it without interrupting. Then Aldrin began with the specific points. "Mr. Caro," he said, "you accessed the transmission on a non-standard frequency using an unauthorized decryption method." "The transmission was addressed to me," Finn said. "The decryption key was a name I had been given. I was the only person who could have opened it." "You filed an emergency transport request without medical credentials or authorization from a senior medical officer." "I filed a request. The outpost commander authorized the transport. I followed the process available to me." "You inserted yourself into an active medical situation without any relevant qualifications." Finn paused for just a moment. "I sat with a patient who had asked me to come. I talked to him. I stayed." Aldrin looked at his documents. The medical observer on site had assessed the situation and provided a recommended course of action. "The recommended course of action was to wait for him to die," Finn said. He kept his voice even. "I wasn't able to do that. The recommendation was based on established medical protocol and the complete recorded history of this condition," Aldrin said. 12 cases, all assessed by qualified medical professionals, all resulting in the same outcome. The protocol exists because it represents the best available knowledge." "With respect," Finn said, "the best available knowledge produced 12 deaths. I'm not sure that qualifies it as the best available approach." There was a brief silence across the panel. One of the other members, a Yavari delegate whose name Finn had not caught, made a note on her data pad. Aldrin's expression did not change, but something behind it shifted slightly, the way the surface of water shifts when something moves beneath it. "Mr. Caro," Aldrin said, "the board's concern is not with the outcome. The outcome is unexpected and we acknowledge that. The concern is with the process. You acted on personal sentiment rather than established practice. You had no qualifications, no authorization, and no medical basis for your intervention. We cannot allow the precedent that individuals may simply insert themselves into medical situations because of personal relationships, regardless of the result." Finn opened his mouth. He did not get to speak, because Vreth spoke first. He had been still throughout the hearing, which the panel had apparently interpreted as absence, as if a creature his size could be present in a room and not noticed. Finn had been aware of him the entire time, aware of the quality of his stillness, which was not the stillness of sleep or weakness. It was the stillness of something very large that is choosing, deliberately, not to move yet. When Vreth spoke, the communication link carried his voice with the full weight of it, still rougher than normal, still slower than it had been before the illness, but enormous in the way that mattered. It was the voice of something that had existed before any of the institutions currently sitting in judgment had been built, and it knew that about itself. "I will speak now," Vreth said. The panel went quiet in the way that people go quiet when they suddenly understand the scale of what is in the room with them. "You filed my people as a territorial resolution," Vreth said. Each word was placed deliberately, with the care of someone who has thought for a long time about what they want to say and intends to say it exactly right. "You gave the destruction of my clan a registration number and a date and a document shorter than most maintenance reports. You assigned me a species status and a code and a comfortable outpost at the edge of your space. When I was dying, you sent an observer and a recommendation. The recommendation was a room and a countdown." No one on the panel spoke. Aldrin's data pad was on the table in front of him. He did not pick it up. "This human," Vreth continued, "was given no authorization and had no credentials. What he had was my name. The name I gave him, which among my people means one thing and one thing only. It means, if I am dying, I want you beside me." He paused and the pause had weight. "He came. He sat beside me. He talked to me through 3 days and 2 nights and he did not leave. Your established practice has a 12 for 12 record of failure. This human tried something your practice had never thought to try. He simply refused to be anywhere else. And I am alive." Another pause. "Do not speak to me about precedent. You set a precedent 400 years ago when you filed my people as a resolution. I am not interested in your process. I am interested in the fact that your process would have let me die, and a junior human researcher with no credentials and no authorization decided that was not acceptable. That is the only fact in this room that matters to me." The review chamber was completely silent. Aldrin looked at his documents. He looked at the panel. He looked at the documents again. The Yavari delegate had stopped making notes. The other 3 panel members were all very still in the particular way of people who are recalibrating something important. Aldrin said that the board would recess to consider its findings. The communication link closed. Finn sat in the quiet hold with Vreth for a long moment. Outside the porthole the stars continued their patient and indifferent burning. "You didn't have to do that," Finn said. "Yes," Vreth said simply. "I did." Finn looked at him and did not argue. The review was never formally concluded. The case file moved into an administrative category that nobody appeared to be in any hurry to retrieve. No finding was issued. No formal acknowledgement arrived. But 17 days after the hearing, Finn received a message from a Salvari Research Institute requesting information on what they carefully called human-adjacent approaches to long-term patient care. 3 days after that, a similar message arrived from a Yavari Medical Council. Within 6 weeks, 6 different council species had made the same request, each phrasing it differently, each being careful about the language, none of them mentioning the hearing or Vretha's name or the 12 cases. Finn answered every message. He was thorough and detailed and generous with the information because that was how he did things. He did not mention the messages to Vreth. There was no need. Vreth already knew the way old things know when the world has shifted slightly on its axis, quietly without announcement in a direction that cannot be fully reversed. They returned to Outpost Varan 7 on a quiet Tuesday morning. No announcement had been made. No one was waiting at the docking bay. The outpost continued its ordinary business the way it always did. Equipment running, staff moving through corridors, the recycled air carrying its familiar smell of metal and something almost like food. Life at the edge of galactic space did not pause for arrivals, even unusual ones. But word traveled the way word always travels in small enclosed spaces. By the afternoon meal period, everyone on the outpost knew that Vreth had come back. Finn walked beside him through the main corridor, matching his pace to Vretha's slower one without making anything of it. Vreth moved carefully, with the deliberate steadiness of someone relearning the distance between their body and the ground. He was not fully recovered. The medical observer had been clear about that. The improvement was real and significant, but the hollow flame sickness had left marks that would take a long time to fade, and some of them might not fade completely. His scales still had pale patches at the edges. He tired more quickly than before. But he was walking. He was here. The distinction between those two facts and the alternative was not lost on either of them. The common area went slightly quieter when they entered it. Not silent. Just that particular reduction in noise that happens when people are trying to look as though they are not looking. Finn noticed it and ignored it in the same motion. Vreth noticed it and did the same, because he had been navigating rooms that went quiet when he entered them for 4 centuries and had long since stopped finding it surprising. What was different, and Finn noticed this too, was that the quiet this time had a different quality than before. Previously the quiet had been the quiet of avoidance, of people creating distance from something they were uncertain about or slightly afraid of. This quiet had something else in it. Something closer to the way a room goes quiet when something significant is present and people are not quite sure how to arrange themselves around it. Vreth walked to a table near the center of the room. Not the far end. Not the viewport table where he had sat alone every meal period for as long as anyone at the outpost could remember. The center table, where the light came in better and the sounds of the room gathered rather than faded. He lowered himself into the space beside it with the slow care his body currently required, and then he settled and he was still. Finn set his tray down across from him and sat. The outpost arranged itself around this new fact over the following weeks the way water arranges itself around a new shape, gradually, without drama, finding the form that fits. Other species began, cautiously at first, to sit at nearby tables. Not with Vreth specifically, nobody was quite ready for that yet, but near him, in a way that narrowed the distance that had always existed before. A Salvari researcher nodded at him once across the common area and Vreth returned the nod, which the researcher appeared to find significant enough to mention to 2 colleagues. A young Yavari delegate who had joined the outpost staff recently and had no established habit of avoidance simply sat down one evening 2 tables away and ate her meal without performing any particular awareness of where she was sitting. Small things. But small things are how large things begin. Finn watched all of this with quiet satisfaction and said nothing about it because pointing at a thing that is growing sometimes disturbs the growing. The transfer offer arrived on a Wednesday, 3 weeks after their return. It came from the Council's Core Research Administration, a formal message, properly headed, addressed to Finn by name and junior rank and then immediately suggesting that both of those designations were about to become outdated. The position was a senior xenobiological research post at one of the Council's central stations. A place where real resources existed and real work got done, where researchers actually shaped the direction of galactic scientific understanding rather than cataloging mineral formations at the edge of known space. It was the kind of offer that did not come to people like Finn. Junior researchers at unimportant outposts did not receive messages from core administration. They received reassignments to other unimportant outposts, or they waited long enough that something middling opened up, and they took it and considered themselves fortunate. The only reason Finn was receiving this message was because of what had happened on a drifting survey vessel, and they both knew it. He read it twice, set his tablet down and went to dinner. He did not mention it to Vreth. He was not sure why exactly. Perhaps because he had not yet sorted out what he thought about it himself and did not want to have the conversation before he did. Perhaps because some part of him already knew what he thought and was not ready to look at it directly. He spent 3 days not deciding. On the evening of the third day he was standing at the viewport. The far one, the one that looked out into open space, the one where everything had started, when he heard the slow deliberate sound of large footsteps coming to a stop beside him. Vreth stood at the viewport and looked out at the stars. For a while neither of them said anything. This was not unusual. They had always been comfortable in shared silence, the two of them, and the viewport had always been a place where silence felt natural rather than empty. Then Vreth spoke. "I have been thinking," he said, "about something I want to do." His voice had continued to recover over the 3 weeks since their return. It was not yet what it had been, but it was close, low and deep and carrying that quality of something that had been in existence long enough to be unhurried about most things. Finn waited. "Among my people," Vreth said, "the birth name moved in one direction. It was given by the one who needed, to the one who was trusted. It was a request. It was a declaration of what another person meant to you." He paused. "In all of our recorded history, in everything that was written down before the territorial resolution, there is no account of the gesture being returned. Of the trusted person giving their own name back." Finn was still. Outside the viewport the stars did what stars do. Burned quietly at distances too large to feel personal. "It was not a custom because it was not considered," Vreth continued. "Because the shape of the thing did not seem to require it. You give your name to the person you trust. What more is there to do?" Another pause longer. "But I have been thinking that the shape of the thing is incomplete. That there is something it does not say that should be said." Finn looked at him. Vreth was looking at the stars, his amber eyes carrying the light from 1,000 distant fires. "I want to say it," Vreth said. And then he spoke a name. It was his own, not his council registration, not his outpost designation, not the name in any file. His birth name. The one he had been given before any council existed to file it. He shaped it carefully and deliberately, the way he had shaped Finn's name in that first message across the distance of 2 dying systems, and he gave it outward into the air between them. It landed the way significant things land, not loudly but with weight. Finn understood what had just happened. He had read enough, learned enough, sat through enough quiet evenings of Vretha's careful words to understand exactly what he was being given and what it meant. It was not the same gesture as the first name sharing, though it used the same form. This one said something the original gesture had no language for. It said, "You are not only the one I would call when I am dying. You are the one I am glad to be alive beside." Finn stood with it for a moment. He let it settle into somewhere real and permanent, the way you settle a thing you intend to keep. "Thank you," he said. 2 words. No speech. No ceremony. Just the plain and complete meaning of them, said by someone who understood fully what they were thanking and intended every part of it. Vreth said nothing. He turned back to the stars. But something in his stillness had changed. It was easier now, the way a thing is easier when it has finally been set down after being carried for a long time. The next morning Finn opened the transfer offer and declined it. The message he sent back was polite and brief. He thanked the administration for the consideration. He said that he was currently engaged in research of ongoing importance and preferred to continue it where he was. He did not explain further because he did not feel further explanation was necessary. He closed the message and went to the meal counter and picked up 2 trays. That evening the common area was its usual mixture of noise and species and the small ordinary business of people sharing a space. The light was good near the center table. The sounds of the room gathered there rather than fading. Finn set 1 tray down on each side of the table and sat across from Vreth the same way he had sat across from him every evening for longer than the outpost staff could quite remember. Around them, without announcement, the other tables filled. A Salvari researcher sat 2 seats away. The young Yavari delegate chose the nearby table again. A pair of Drakari, no, not Drakari, a pair of Varani delegates, settled in across the room and nodded in the general direction of the center table and were nodded at in return. Nobody said anything particular. Nobody made anything of it. They simply shared the space, which is one of the quietest and most complete things that different kinds of people can do together. Finn ate his dinner. Breath ate his. Outside the wide viewport of Outpost Varan 7 the stars continued their patient burning, the same as they always had, across distances too large to name and through time too long to measure. But at the center table of the common area, in the good light, an old dragon who had eaten alone for 400 years sat beside a young human who had simply decided one Thursday evening to carry a tray to the far end of the room. And that was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.